Hi, my name is Stephen Lozier, and I am an education specialist in the Metropolitan School District of Wayne Township, focused on the planning and implementation of project-based learning units in our schools. This module is one of many designed to help teachers better understand project-based learning and design and develop PBL units to engage and challenge their students. This presentation is available to you by following the link in the My Big Campus bundle, as well as the Google folder associated with it. I would suggest you open that presentation in another tab, as you may want to pause this video and click on a link or a resource in the presentation to explore further. Please note, if you're new to PBL and building your knowledge, this video will be considered the final one in the sequence. So, PBL management day to day. So your objectives: understand some instructional structures and tips for managing your PBL classroom, consider my predicted or foreseen student need to knows, and plan lessons to address them. So we're really getting down into the kind of the weeds of PBL instruction to think about the day-to-day instruction and management of a classroom. So most PBL units kick off with a launch day with some type of an entry event, directly followed by the creation of a need to know space or chart. Those could be abbreviated as N2K. The launch days also sometimes establish milestones and or calendars, if those are available, and how it's going to be structured. They also establish groups, oftentimes, by establishing norms, roles, and expectations, both as the teachers and the class or the classrooms. And then oftentimes teachers will immediately use a team building activity at that time to help those groups kind of get together, to gel, and that sort of thing. We looked at some of those team building pieces in the module on collaboration. So a PBL unit uses real and fabricated need to knows. So I frame them that way, in the sense that you as your teacher have an obligation to ensure that students get the content, knowledge, and skills as stipulated by the standards. And so PBL units are not devoid of standards, but your objectives or learning targets, which are taught in your mini lessons, all come from student need to know. So students have to recognize a need for the standards. So you need to have student-driven need to knows that you share in that space. But then as you're coaching students through that initial need-to-know space, and as you continually refer back to it, you may then add your specific ones from your content, specific ones from the standards, specific ones that you know students are accountable for and need to know. You would coach those onto the chart by saying things to the class like, you know, I've learned about this piece, and do we think we need to explore that? And then students say, yeah, I think that's a need to know, and then that creates the need for it. So there's really two kind of ways to think about I guess the chunks of instruction in a classroom. There are mini lessons, so there's some form of whole group instruction based on a need to know for the entire group. So this is when you're kind of lecturing. Maybe you're using interactive lecture. And then there are workshops. So these are forms of small group instruction where students self-select whether or not to attend based on a personal need to know. So what I would do when I was using PBL in the classroom oftentimes was lead specific mini lessons based on student need to knows, based on the standards, based on my content, and then I would offer workshops sometimes to review those for kids, to shore up any misconceptions for times. I would sometimes do a pretest of that lesson, and if students already could pass the pretest or mastered the content, they would continue to work on the unit while I worked with a small group like that. So workshops were also a great way to manage absences. So if kids missed a mini lesson, I could run it again as a workshop, but only working with a small group of kids that needed it, not the entire group of kids. So here is just a little bit more elaboration on mini lessons and workshops. So we used to say start small when it came to PBL units, and now we say start structured. So go to your teaching tools. So go to lecture, go to classroom discussions, go to Kagan cooperative groupings, go to things that have worked for you in the past, but understand that you're restructuring them under a student need to know, and all of those things are connecting back to the driving question or challenge. And also use conventional, traditional assessment tools. Use those things you know that work in terms of test quizzes, and essays. Those things don't go away in a PBL environment. They only get restructured or repurposed in that regard. And then just to establish this a little bit more, as you're thinking about your mini lessons and workshops you're going to plan for students, you're going to need to think about time, and you're going to need to think about structure. So when you look at how often to offer those things, in terms of they need to be offered every day, every other day, weekly, how do you want to structure your calendar to think about that? And then two, you want to think about individual and group accountability. And again, in terms of student learning, we need to ensure that each individual student is performing at a proficient or mastery level. And so you want to be cautious in terms of the illusion that a group's maybe mastered something, but not each student. So think about that. So milestones. So milestones are benchmarks that pace the unit toward that presentation day. So they give you formative assessments to say, are my kids on pace to present to that authentic audience member at the end? They check student and group progress. They provide a sense of accomplishment and momentum in the student, so the students see themselves checking those things off and moving towards that end goal. They hold students accountable individually, and they also share accountability, so you can use milestones and have students check those off for you. As we talked in a previous module about group work, how can students be a part of the process to make it more efficient and effective for everyone? Milestones can start conversations about either why they weren't met or where you go from once you've met them. They can lead to interventions in terms of if milestones aren't met. They establish collective goals, and then ultimately they establish a growth culture. So students within the PBL classroom and the culture of a classroom, they value the fact that they're supporting each other's growth and the meeting of those milestones. And I used this example before, but this is another example of ensuring that the rigor level of your requirements are met in terms of management day to day. So the difference between the kiddie carrier project requirements. One looks like this, one looks like this, and in terms of those milestones, they've been met, but they aren't where they need to be. This is an example of a milestone sheet that I shared also in another presentation, but just to review the one way to manage the day-to-day, so you can see what that looks like. And so this one doesn't have specific dates, but you can see the accomplishment of those standards as well. Here's an example of a milestone sheet that I used. And so these would obviously be more specific in terms of those milestones and benchmarks, but you can also see how we've crossed those things off and progressed through some of those pieces in week one, and you keep just clicking along in order to meet the target date. So on the planning form, you've created there's a space for foreseen need to knows, so that's where you predict. So you sit down, you put on your student hat, and you think, if I was a student, I was given this question and I asked it, here are what I think my students are going to say they need to know. Here are the need to knows I know I need from my content or my standards. Also know students will come up with need to knows you did not think of, and that's part of the process. And then from there, from box J, excuse me, you plan your mini lessons and workshops. So they're driven from there, and it's a place to capture some of those. Ultimately, those mini lessons and workshops lead to the construction of your calendar. So here is an example of that as you look through here to kind of see how you would pace it out. There's also some examples here and some videos from BIE, so if you want to pause this presentation and click on those in the other one to go see some of those, I think that'd be beneficial to see how other teachers have managed the process. And then finally, the last page of the project planning form is that week-to-week kind of thing. So once you get down to here's the pacing guide or that. And then one final part of this is the project packet. So a lot of teachers will use folders to manage groups, and within there they'll put things and have a common place for students to store and keep and manage their own work to give them some practice in those 21st century skills as well of just organization. But in that project packet you can have a roster, the contract, calendar, rubrics, assessments, checklist of requirements, templates for contracts and lists, presentation exhibition schedule, resource list, places just to keep and organize things as a group. Obviously that can be, as this implies, paper copies, that can be digital, that sort of thing. So think about that. So that just kind of concludes a quick overview of some of the management tools you can use day to day. So remember that up until this point, this is a planned unit. It will likely need to be tweaked, revised, and overhauled as you implement it, after you implement it, and ultimately it will lose its relevance over the years as well. That's one of the things we try to make a point is good PBL units have a shelf life, and sometimes issues, problems, and challenges aren't as relevant as they were a couple of years before, so know that. Ultimately, PBL's power is to effectively and efficiently meet the needs of your learners, and you're going to need to do that on a day-to-day basis as we've kind of looked at here. So thank you for your time.